Well, unfortunately in this film I didn't actually get to work with Alan because we all shot our pieces separately. But I have worked with Alan in the past, on stage actually, more than in movies. I think that Alan would have been incredibly proud that this was his last movie, because what I love about it is that the Alan you see up on the screen is much closer to the real Alan Rickman that we all knew and loved. You see his intelligence, you see his wit, and you see his authority, and I think that that was very much the Alan that we knew. The other characters that he played so brilliantly in the Harry Potter series, you know, as the baddie in Die Hard and those sorts of things, he was a wonderful actor, so he always gave an incredible performance. But I think that the Alan that we see on screen in this movie is very close to the real Alan. And I also feel that the story of the film, more than the story, what do I mean, Gavin? The implication of the inner soul of the film, I think is very much something that Alan would have identified with and would have been very proud to be a part of.
Well, thank you. Helen put it beautifully in terms of describing Alan's personality and what he brings with his intelligence, his wit, his warmth, his love of people. I sometimes feel a little awkward answering this question because, unlike Helen, I only met Alan on this film. So I haven't known Alan his whole life, and I feel very privileged in a way to have worked with him, and also slightly awkward because I can't believe he's not here to articulate the film and what he feels about the ideas raised in the film, which Helen was alluding to, because he did have strong feelings about the concepts and the themes and the ideas raised by the film, and I wish he was here to articulate them, because he was so articulate. And when, as a director, you're working with actors like Alan and Helen, and the actors in this cast are highly intelligent people who genuinely think about what it is we're trying to do. And I can't really say anything more than I'm so sorry he's not here to sit with us and lend another voice to this interesting conversation that the film throws up based on Guy's wonderful script. So I just feel very fortunate to have been able to work with Alan. I had no idea it would be his last film, and it feels strange to me that that is the case, but I'm very proud to have worked with him and to have him in this film.
Well, for me, actually, I think you should start.
Should I?
Yes,
because it's sort of historical.
It starts with you.
Yes, I suppose I read the script. Well, yes, and I can explain how I came to be so thrilled to have Helen in the film, because I was, as directors do, reading scripts and looking for something that would really capture me, and one reads many scripts, and some of them are good and some of them are not. But every now and then one really grabs you and you simply can't put it down, and that sounds like a cliche. But I hope that if you've seen a film, I hope that it keeps you on the edge of your seat. Well, the script did that for me. I was on the edge of my seat, I turned the pages, I wanted to know what was going to happen next. So there was the thriller element, the entertainment factor, if you like, that said, this is really exciting. But then there was another layer, which was, wait a minute, I thought this, and I've just turned the page and a character has said something that's just spun my head in another direction. And what do I think now? So now I not only want to know what happens next, but what do I think should happen next? And if it does, how will I feel? And as I was reading the script, I thought, well, I really want to make this for those reasons. And then for some reason, and Helen and I, this is our first time sitting in a conference together, so this is kind of fun to be able to tell her this. I kept thinking, Helen Mirren. But you may not know this, but the character was not written for a woman. It was written as a man. Colonel Powell was a man. And I kept thinking, well, I'm not going to watch you while I do. Who's steely, determined, intelligent, has a real presence and the ability to look. Yeah, that's very, very sexy, very sexy. And especially because the wardrobe is so clean. Yes. We really need someone who can pull off the wardrobe. I love it. You see, she's totally thrown. No, I love it. So who will play this character? And for some reason, I kept thinking of Helen as an actor, male or female, But I also confess that I thought to myself, I got to the end and I thought, this is a subject that should be talked about by as many people as possible, and that women should not be excluded from this conversation by having a sort of male-dominated cast that makes it look like a sort of boys' own war movie, because it's so much more than that. And so, not only was I fortunate enough to get the best actor for the role, I also got a great actress, if I may, who I hope appeals to men and women, especially because she's sexy. But let's be honest, Helen brings an incredible strength and power to this role, and the ability to play those still moments. I love those moments where we push in on you and you've just realized it's been done, and the ambivalence that you feel you knew you had to do it. I mean, you can pick out so many of those moments. So that's, I fell in love with the script and I thought of Helen, and I called the writer, Guy, and I said, Guy, I love it, but I have one question. And in fairness to Guy, he hesitated only for a few moments, because as a writer, you've been doing this, and now this director's going to change it. And he said, I know, Helen. Why didn't I think of that? Yes, okay, do that. Do you think she'll do it? I said, I have no idea. So now I passed to Helen, who then received the script through her agent.
Then I received the script. I didn't know that there was this backstory of this originally being written for a man, and I so applaud you, Gavin, for casting me. Obviously that's great for me, but any woman, and I love how you articulated it just now, that it takes it out of just being a boys' movie about war, and I think that it makes it much more universal, that we are all a part of this conversation, and I really applaud you for that. I wish more directors had that point of view, and writers. I received the script like Gavin. I had exactly the same response to it. It was an absolute page turner, but I thought much more than that. I thought the subject matter was serious and threw up a conversation that I think we all need to be having. This is the reality of war in our present day and age, and I can only assume will become more and more prevalent as we travel through time. So we need to discuss this and really be aware of what the various issues are. And I thought this film was a great war film, because so many war films are basically, good guys and bad guys. And this is not about, well, of course, you do have bad guys in it, but it's about the terrible moral decisions that any war throws up. So I thought it was I hope it will go into the canon of great war movies. And I said to my agent, there were a couple of other projects that were flying around at the time and were a possible conflict with this. And I said, that's the movie I want to do. If there are any conflicts, I'm telling you, that's the movie I want to do. And at that time, we didn't have distribution. Gavin went into this film with enormous courage, and his financiers and producers, without distribution. And it was a really, what they call a small film, one of those small films that are very, very delicate little flowers, because if you don't get distribution, it's straight to TV, basically. So, but I really thought it was one of the most exciting scripts I've read in a long time.
Me too, and it's a credit to Guy Hood.
Yes.
Great writer.
Who I'd worked with before. He'd written one of my crime suspect series, and a wonderful one, really very, very powerful. So I had worked with him before as a writer. I think, we were very lucky in that, in a way, the film in a way happens in a sense in real time, over the 2-hour period. That's the idea, isn't it, Gavin? The 2 hours that you watch it in is the 2 hours in which the film happens. You'd done all the ground stuff before I came on board.
No. You were my first up. Yes, this is a great story. Yes, I'll tell you. Yes.
I was
great
first.
That she doesn't know.
I was first up, so the politicians hadn't been shot, the drone pilots hadn't been shot, and we all shot completely separately from each other for financial reasons.
Yep.
They couldn't afford to bring us all to South Africa. We shot it in Cape Town, and all staying in hotels while everyone, so to save money, you know, the people in the bunker with me were all brought in, and we just shot our stuff. And when I was talking on the phone to Alan or to Aaron, I was actually talking to Gavin, or the first AD, so the sound guy. So there we are in our bunker, and I've never shot a movie like this, and very complex, because you know, this director had to keep in his mind all his cuts, the rhythm of how people would be talking in this room, how it was going to interact with this. It was extraordinarily complex, actually. And we spent half a day, Gavin and I, just thinking about how we were going to shoot it, in what sequence, how we were going to do it. So basically, in very roughly, we shot the whole movie, as far as I was concerned, my character, in one direction, from beginning to end. Then we turned around, shot the whole movie from beginning to end in another direction. Again, financially the most economic way of doing it. And then, so I'm actually ultimately speaking to your point, that I was very lucky in a sense that I could keep, you know, every day I was dealing with the sequence of what had happened, and exactly where each moment sat within the whole piece.
No, I think that what Helen says is exactly right. We really did have financial constraints and time constraints, and it was quite intimidating just to figure out how will we do this, and it was also about availability. Helen was available for a certain window, Alan Rickman was available for a different window, Aaron Paul was available for a different. How am I going to do this? Because obviously in a perfect world, everybody's there. When they're not on screen, they're reading the lines off camera, and if you had the money and the time, you'd keep everybody for the full 6 weeks and off you go. That wasn't the case. Helen was first up, which means that all those screens that you see in her bunker are just green. In fact, they were just a big white sheet, actually, and because we were using some of the light through that to bounce off her. But anyway, so those screens, the action that happens on those screens, the way the screen is divided into thirds with what's happening at the house in the center, what's happening inside in the house on the left. So I did have that in my mind, how it would ultimately be structured, but we hadn't shot the material. So what Helen had was a bunch of little crosses in the middle, and this is where the house is. When your eye line's there, that's the house. The house from the top, Helen. Oh, so not inside, no, the one from the top. And then this one on this side is inside. Then over here is where the characters will pop up if they're talking to you. So we mark all these spots. So now we have those moments, but then what are the moments? It's a credit to Helen and Aaron Paul and Alan Rickman and Jeremy Northam and all the actors in this movie, that their power of imagination, which Helen has said before in other interviews, is really, I think I'm correct in saying, that actors define the ability to react and listen, but also the ability to imagine the scenario that in many cases does not exist. And in this film, more than any other, did not exist. There's a blank screen, and all Dame Helen Mirren has is my voice hiding behind going, all right, Helen, the child is walking out.
Oh, but you were great, yeah.
Oh, my Lord.
No,
and I'm thinking, it was too loud, it was too soft, am I stretching?
He was fantastic. He talked us through it. You know,
so what
he
did
talked
you
us emotionally through it, and it was absolutely invaluable.
So that was how we did it. And then Aaron Paul arrived, and Helen had to go, and then Aaron was similarly in a situation in a tight space. But to answer your technical questions, one of the things that's so important in this film for me is those tiny moments. And the way I felt I would approach those moments was by keeping my actors' eye lines very tight to the lens. And I remember there was one moment where I'm not sure, the first day or two where Helen was saying, does this director actually know what he's doing? And I remember, you may not remember this, but I remember being terrified because I thought, I need to tighten her eye line and I need her to be on that mark as the camera lands here because I want to look right into her eyes and I've got a certain key light here. And if I'm off that mark by half a foot, the impact is slightly profile. And I remember thinking, I have to say to Helen, I really need this moment. That you went, all right then. And those moments for a young director working with a seasoned professional who's like, you know, I've not worked with Helen Mirren before, and I was thrilled. And then after that, we got on great, because I knew that she understood what I was trying to do. I think maybe you felt in a moment that I wasn't a complete idiot. And it was great. And that's how it worked with all the actors. So Aaron Paul, we even went even further inside that drone room. How do you give energy to what is essentially a great deal of static people? My fear was, as Helen said, it might be a TV movie if it doesn't have enough energy. So with Helen, we placed her desk right at the back of a large, long room this size. That was a design set. And the idea was to allow my actors, especially Helen, to move towards the screen, and you'll see how much she does that. She saw the space, I didn't have to say anything. She said, oh, I know, I'm going to move forward, intimidate that lawyer now, and then I'm going to walk away from him. But that is also something you do in production design. If the space is not the right size, the actor has no space to move. So that's staging. That's just staging. And then Aaron, of course, couldn't do that because he's confined to, he had to know where to go. Well, then it's about, well, where can I put the camera to get that kind of energy? And the camera was either very profile over the two of them to create that bond between him and the young sensor operator, or it was right in their face, and I chose, which was a bit of a risky moment, but I think it pays off, to play the eye lines into camera. So in your face that you feel his pressure looking at that screen. So those are slightly unconventional ways of saying, I am going to get inside the minds of the characters by going to the place where actors are best, which is in the eyes. Because the subtlest of moments happen. We read each other's emotions without realizing it, through slight subtle changes in the iris, in little things. And if the actor is feeling it and using their imagination, those subtle things are happening. As a director, you want to be there to get it. And that's about having tight eye lines. Rather long-winded answer though.
Well, I have no idea how far the technology has gone. And because it's gone this far, how far, therefore, will it go in the future, in the next 10 or 20 years? That completely took me by surprise. You know, you sort of read in the newspaper, oh, you know, there was a drone attack on blah, blah, and you sort of, oh, I've never really thought about it. And it made me, obviously, really consider the reality of this stuff on the ground, the extraordinary way in which warfare has changed. You think of the 19th century idea of warfare, of people riding into battle on horses with sabres, you know, and then the First World War idea of trenches and guns, Second World War idea of aeroplanes and bombs, and now we're in the sort of third, or, you know, warfare is continuing on. And I suspect it will be very much a part of the future. I do remember my parents, who went through the Blitz in London, said the most terrifying thing about the Blitz, about being bombed, was not actually the aeroplanes, the German aeroplanes coming over, although that was terrifying. It was what the Germans had invented, this thing called the doodlebug, which is a very early form of drone warfare, which was an unmanned vehicle that came over and made this drone sound. And she said the terror was when you heard the sound stop, because when it stopped was when it dropped its bombs. And so my mother, in a way, had a sort of first-hand experience of what these people must experience. It must be so terrifying because it's coming out of nowhere. You don't know that it's coming.
Well, picking up on what you said, Helen, one of the things that the research in terms of areas where there are constant drone surveillance, especially the tribal areas of Pakistan, where it's constant drone surveillance and drone attacks on a fairly regular basis, is that population is, picking up on what Helen said, is very traumatized by the sound of drone and also by the weather. Now, sounds crazy, but obviously the one thing that these drones can't control is the weather, and they don't do a very good job when it's an overcast day. So the kids in these areas go out to play in the streets when it's overcast, but a sunny day is a scary day. That to me, when I was reading this, was just horrible. Whatever our feeling of whether we need to be doing it or not, just that fact, now expand that. Because the concept in the military is the idea of moving to a state of total situational awareness. That's the quest. If you're in the military, such as a character like Helen plays, you can completely understand why you would not want to be the person who missed catching the kind of thing we see in the movie. Well, in order to achieve that, there's an impetus to have more and more surveillance, more and more armed surveillance, hovering over as many places as possible. So So think of the way we now collect all of our telephone calls, right? Well, the next step is to collect all of us visually, all the time, everywhere. Now we have them in London, and in many ways it makes London a very safe city in the sense that there are cameras on the streets, but they're not yet armed. The idea of the drone world is that if we really want to know what's happening in the incident that happened here in California, if we had the drones up all the time, watching us all the time, ready to launch a weapon at any time, at any target, let's not talk about whether that's a necessary thing or not, it's just creepy in and of itself. And that's what fascinates me, and I don't have a good answer for it, but the technology, as Helen was saying, is evolving all the time, and not only the technology, but the amount of the technology that we can use. So when drones started, there were a few. When we shot the movie, there were 65 permanent orbits. Now, I don't know how many there are, and it's moving in that direction. So that's the kind of policy question here. To what extent do we want to feel permanently under surveillance in order to feel safe? And to what extent does that start to make you feel you're potentially living in a police state? I don't know, and that's why I love this movie, because it presents us all with enough information, I think, visually, to begin to have a conversation. Because before I did this movie, like Helen, I knew about drones, but I didn't really know the details of them. And so what I think we hope from this film is that A, you'll have a tremendous thriller experience, and you'll be on the edge of your seat, but at the end, hopefully, these are the kind of conversations that it'll generate over your dining room table.
I think of it in a way, when I was watching it, I was thinking, in a way it's like a courtroom, it's like a courtroom drama, and the audience are the jury.
Mm-hmm.
And when the jury leave the theatre at the end of the film, now they're going off to make their decisions about what is right and what is wrong. So I'm really hoping that people will leave the theatre, go out to dinner and have very intense conversations about morality, philosophy,
the human factor.
And yes.
Well, thank you for saying that, because that is at the end of the day, one of the reasons I think this script of Guy's was so powerful is because he does show the problem or the situation from multiple points of view, including the point of view of the innocent bystander who is affected by the decision to strike. And once you do that, and you humanize that innocent person, as opposed to seeing them as some sort of number that might be, not only do you humanize them and therefore encourage anyone involved in this dreadful decision to pause before simply taking a life, but also you realize that if that life is taken, anyone who is associated with that life may not feel particularly kindly towards the people who launched that missile. And that is where the Monica Dolan character, Monica, we were talking about, who does such a fantastic job.
She's a female politician who argues the case of not doing it.
And what I love about that character, and especially Monica's performance of it, is it has, for me, one of the most powerful lines in the film, where you think that she doesn't want to do this because she's touchy-feely about the little girl. You know, the classic putting onto the woman, imposing the male view of the woman as the touchy-feely. And then she says, I wouldn't do it, but not necessarily for the reasons you think. She says, I think it may be better for 80 people to die so that the local population, I'm paraphrasing, but so that the local population blames Al-Shabaab and hates our enemy than for us to kill one innocent child and have the local population turn against us and side with Al-Shabaab. Now that is such a powerful, for me, that is the one moment in the film where now I really don't know.
Mm.
You know, because if we don't win the hearts and minds in this war, and everybody, hearts and minds, yes, really, really. Actually, yes, in my view, if we don't win the hearts and minds war, we are doomed to escalate this conflict. And I worry that that's kind of what's happening. We're escalating.
And
but
it's great at the end where the warlords basically pick up the parents of the body of the girl. You go, oh God, yes, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
they're taken by that.
And those are the people that are closest to them on the ground. I'll tell you one interesting little story, just as a digression, that recently I was listening to an amazing podcast, and I'm forgetting, about a young Somali refugee. And I do think we should also mention that the Somali actors in the film are refugees from Somalia in Cape Town. The little girl, who I think gives a remarkable performance, Aisha Takar, and the man who plays her father, Ahmad Hajia, whose own brother was shot by Al-Shabaab. And doing this film was a big risk for them, because there is this split between those who reject Al-Shabaab and those who support it. So I just wanted to give that moment to, because I think those are actors who've never acted before, and I think in the ensemble, they measure up. You don't say, oh my goodness, they're dropping the ball because they've never acted before. So I'm very proud of them. I just wanted to say that. But those Somali refugees are faced with a tremendous problem right now. What has been happening in Kenya, thankfully not as much in South Africa, but it's been happening in Kenya, is that the police have been harassing those refugees, shaking them down for money, and eventually, listening through this podcast, which followed the life of one for a year, some of them go back to Somalia and they join Al-Shabaab. Because what are you going to do? You ran from them. And here we have the Syrian refugee crisis. Now I'm getting overly political, but I do think that the film throws up this kind of conversation. And that's a credit to Guy who wrote the script.
We were very lucky. We had a British military man who was on set all the time, and also he was very accessible for me. And I had long conversations with him about who this woman might be, who Colonel Powell might be. Obviously, a woman who's joined the military, maybe in her early 20s, maybe even her late teens, at a time when that was not commonplace. So what kind of a girl decides to do that in the first place, and then has the abilities that's brought her to this position of authority and power within the military? And he was great in helping me, giving me guiding points about what he felt that sort of woman would be. And then he was very, very valuable in terms of just literally physical things, about the way you wear your uniform, the way in which your behaviour is. So he was very valuable.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I'd read Guy's script, I was somewhat intimidated because there's a tremendous amount of research that he'd already done and I needed to catch up. So I immediately dived in, started the internet, and then I called some friends that I have in the military. I know a colonel who's in the Air Force, who knows colonels, who knows other colonels. Before you know it, it was amazing to me how the Air Force was willing and happy to talk to me, because you might think, well, is this... And I want to say thank you to those folks in the military who talked about it, because for them, they are the guys, these colonels, who have to take care of these younger pilots. And then we got an American drone pilot who came on as a major in the Air Force and still flies drones, and he's consulted with us, and he still consults for us. And their dilemmas are not unlike ours. There's some people who say, well, military people are tough, they wouldn't cry over this. And the answer is that is not fair and not true, and I'll tell you why. Having been in the military myself, there is an awful moment when you're in this moment of conflict. For Aaron Paul's character, that is the first time he's asked to do two things. One, fire a weapon in combat, albeit that he's far away. But two, in addition to that, which would be bad enough, taking a life is bad enough when it's the enemy. He's also asked in this process to take an innocent life. And it is easy for some people, I've heard them say, to be glib about this. Oh, well, military people are tough. Yes and no. It's why these pilots experience double the amount of post-traumatic stress than a fighter pilot. And I got this from our consultant, who was a F-16 pilot, who'd flown in the Iraq War, dropped payloads over Iraq, and said, I get to fly out. I drop and I leave. And he said, now I drop and I stay and I go back and look, and I have to identify the bodies, and some days it's a bit much because then I go home right then, whereas when we were flying in Iraq, I was at a base, I went and had a beer with my buddies, I didn't have to go home to my wife. So again, a conversation that actually the military were happy to have, because the Congress has been pushing for the expansion of this drone program. And some people in the Air Force are saying, slow down, we're burning out these pilots. It's hard to keep recruiting them. The sensor operators are as young as 19. They don't necessarily cope, which Phoebe Fox, by the way, we should say, I think does a wonderful job of that. And all of these characters, I want you to know, are accurately researched. We didn't make it up. I spoke to many people in the military. I also spoke to people who who infiltrate in London, amazing undercover person, who infiltrates the mosques where people are being recruited to go, so that those kids arriving on planes are accurately researched. Samantha Luthwaite was the character we based, who's a real British woman who used to be married to a 7/11 bomber and is now in Somalia. So I do think Guy's research and then me playing catch-up, you can believe that there's accurate research in the film. Wow, well, thank you for seeing that in a rather sometimes difficult body of work, but I think you're right. I don't think as directors or writers we necessarily are aware of the theme that becomes our theme when we're starting out. But having been drafted at 17 into a situation in South Africa where it was morally questionable, to say it without getting too deeply into it right now, and losing one of my friends in the war in Angola that I came to think of as what on earth was this about, witnessing the CIA agents out there supporting our side against the other side because they were being supported by the Soviets, and we were the ham in the sandwich of a hot war that really the rest of the world called a Cold War, but it was a war between those two superpowers for the resources of Africa and the diamonds and the oil. And you go, what, I'm 17, and you suddenly have a major political awakening. I don't feel either proud or ashamed of that. It just happened, but it set me on a path to questioning, which I am proud of, because you then find yourself saying, well, life is not good versus evil, bad choice of phrase, but black and white. It's everything in between. And how do we reach some sort of sense of our own humanity and not think of ourselves as goodies fighting baddies? And I do worry that there's a lot of that in modern film, where you take the audience, you identify with the good guy, whatever the good guy does, however many, you were talking about Expendables, he destroys along the way, as long as he wins in the end, whether it be through violence or revenge, somehow the world is set right. And the truth is it isn't. It isn't set right through revenge. It just leads to more conflict and more post-traumatic stress. So I've overstated it again, but thank you for finding this struggle, and I don't have a good reason for doing it. It's just something that entered my world and seems to want to come out in the work I do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.